Hi, everyone, and welcome to the innovation stage here at our talk today. Bit of a background, my name is Jake Welsh. I'm the Executive Creative Director here at DEPT, based here in the UK. We have some fantastic talks for you guys today. On this stage on innovation, we have three hugely exciting talks from our very own teams here within DEPT and the groups within DEPT as well. Now, you're more than welcome to hop in and out of the talks today. There's going to be three talks in total, around 15 minutes each talk, with around 5 minutes of Q&A at the end. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to pop them in the chat window and we'll cover them. If we do have time, if we don't have time, we'll connect with you guys on LinkedIn, or feel free to reach out with us on LinkedIn that way and we'll connect from there. So without delay, we'd really like to welcome our first speaker to the stage. Now, our first speaker of the day is going to be a talk on stepping into the metaverse, which is actually going to be carried out by Ali and Bell from Byte, which is part of DEPT. Now, a bit of a background. Bell is one of the senior lead creatives at Byte. Bell focuses a lot on elevating traditional creative advertising, essentially using new ways of thinking to move brands to where the audiences are, and obviously not the other way around. Also speaking will be Ali. Ali is the client planning director at Byte, very experienced marketeer with a demonstrated history of leading complex campaigns for multiple clients. So without further ado, I'd like to get Ali and Bell to join the stage, and I'll hand it over to you guys for what should be a great talk.
Thank you so much, Jake. Really, thank you so much to everyone for being here. We're really excited to share some of the thinking around the metaverse with you today. As Jake mentioned, I'm Ali, I'm Client Planning Director. I'm Belle, Senior Lead Creative. And we are here today to talk about fashion's next normal. So that was the brief that we were given, which we will talk about in a minute. But before we jump in, we just want to spend a little bit of time talking about what the next normal will be for our audience. And we think that will be creating, curating, and crafting digital representations of themselves for their friends, their families, and also for strangers. So for people that they might never meet and probably have never met in the past. It sounds bizarre and it sounds pretty scary when you look at it like that, but actually we don't think it's anything new. We think it's actually something that we've been doing for the past 20 years at least. So, I mean, I have a Facebook profile, I have an Instagram profile, I have a LinkedIn profile, a TikTok profile, a Twitter profile, and I, not through any negative way, but I curate what goes onto each of those platforms based on what I perceive will be interesting to the audience. So if I got married, I posted that on Facebook because I think my dad's and my mum's friends will want to know. If I went on holiday, it's going to be on my Instagram. If I want to go viral with a dog video, which no big deal, I did, it was on TikTok. And I mean, everyone here today, you might say, okay, but I don't have a Facebook profile, for example, but you all got here today because you clicked attending on a LinkedIn event, and then you found your way to a virtual map with 3 different stages. And then you clicked on a Zoom link to watch Belle and I talk to you through a screen. So although it sounds pretty scary, we're actually already spending a huge amount of our time online and in a digital space. The latest research shows it's about 59 hours a week, which is about 35% of your time, which is kind of crazy. And it would be really awful if we were spending it in a digital space that hadn't evolved in those past 20 years. So Belle and I were talking about like how horrible it would be to spend 59 hours of your week on a 2002 operating system of your laptop, because it wasn't fit for purpose, right? Whereas now it's super slick, we can do so much with it. And we actually think that that's where digital space gets exciting, because the more time we spend in a digital space, the better we think it will get. So if you spend more time in your car, you're going to want a better car. If you spend more time in your kitchen or cooking, you're going to want better utensils, a better space. And we actually think that that is potentially where this is heading.
So ultimately, more time spent essentially just calls for a more immersive space. And essentially that's what's being born now, which obviously right now we're calling the metaverse. And we often talk about it as if it's one space, which it deserves that kind of grandeur, and that makes a lot of sense. But actually at this point in time, and this will probably change, it's lots of different spaces. And those spaces exist in many forms. The metaverse is more of an immersive digital layer that sits over the top of our IRL. So many places in which you can enter and push the boundaries of physical limits when it comes to communicating or playing or working, or essentially any of the reasons we might go to any physical space. There is always like an action implied with any of the digital spaces as well. So the more immersive a space gets, obviously the more people care about it. And we actually find this super interesting and a huge sort of game changer in how we think about like fashion in the digital space. So 60% of Gen Z and 62% of millennials think how you present yourself online is more important than how you present yourself in person. And this is now obviously in the middle of an extremely upward, quickly moving trajectory. So that's 59 hours a week at this point in time. I mean, I'll be honest, like when we were in lockdown, I started associating all of my colleagues more with their Slack photo than I did to our actual physical memories together, which sounds kind of grim. And let's be honest, a lot of skeptics would be like, oh, that's quite gloomy, but there's an element of empowerment and storytelling and playfulness in branding yourself online. Essentially, it's just another newer form of self-expression that stretches beyond the limits of physicality. And one of the most human things is wanting to explore how we could play with things beyond boundaries, especially in a place like this. So for this space, we're going to need a little more than just a bio, but obviously at the same time, like, why wouldn't we? So fashion is obviously at the core of how we present ourselves. And this is a huge creative outlet for so many people. If people care more about how they present themselves online than in person, then they care more what they look like online, potentially more than physically in the near future, because of how creative they can be within this space. So what if people then have a digital extension of themselves, which essentially obviously is something and an idea that already exists, that is only growing, one that they could be potentially a little riskier with, one they could be one more step removed from for ultimate play. Essentially, even like presenting this, I feel like I would be intrinsically more confident in doing so, potentially if I was an avatar and you weren't staring at my real face. But obviously, we know that digital fashion already exists. Entering into a social space, there's lots of these new brands essentially that are here to kind of combat the more wasteful messaging behind hauls and influencers and the constant need for newness. So they exist to create clothes for you to purely wear on your social platforms, and essentially in like a nicer term, but they kind of Photoshop it onto your like personal imagery. So essentially this behavior is already happening, but there's a bigger opportunity, which is what we think is a lot more interesting. But essentially it's looking forward to like that behavior as the foundation and where we can take it next. So there's something much more exciting beyond our current social space.
And it is quite easy to think about the social space as like the be all and end all of online or digital spaces. And we think about emails and Zoom, but more children play Fortnite than football and basketball combined in the US, which I actually needed to go and check the stats of last night because I didn't quite believe it, but it's true. So there are 4.8 million children who play basketball and football combined in the US. There are 7.5 million who play Fortnite. So, which is insane. And the numbers get bigger if you go out of that market and that cohort. So 3.24 billion gamers worldwide. And what we think is interesting is that they're not just there to game, and it's not a one-way conversation. They are there to communicate with their friends, to hang out with their friends. They are going there after school to see their friends, to meet new people, to hang out. And essentially, they're expressing themselves and they're socializing through these online spaces.
So if you're hanging out with your friends and meeting people and working and going to events and all these things that you care about, you're going to care about the way that you look in the same way that you do in real life. And obviously there are so many stats that we could obviously throw in, whack on a slide that inspire us not to just, sit back and wait and see about when it comes to the metaverse, where's our place. but no fact seemed more real and sort of like reality inducing than the idea that there are 3.2 billion avatars that are essentially looking for something to wear right now. And that's probably out of date even within the couple of seconds ago that I said it, but this is constantly growing at a really, really exciting rate. And let's be honest, no one really wants just one outfit. There is obviously a little skepticism around accepting like the avatar as our digital representatives into a serious space of self-expression. But the numbers kind of speak for themselves, and accepting that this is like a really fun and playful extension of our physical forms is kind of crucial if we want to make the most out of this. And it's not the idea that obviously we're all becoming robots, you know, and I think that's a term that like I throw around lightly, but a lot of people say it, but essentially we now just have more spaces to play, and we can almost essentially be like, remember that I wish I could wear both of these outfits at once, and like essentially in the metaverse we kind of can, because we exist in so many new forms. So obviously this space to play is still hugely in its infancy. Obviously currently your audience is spending 35% of their time online and growing, and they care more about how they perceived in a digital space and growing. So now is the biggest opportunity to be like the tastemakers in digital fashion and really forge the foundations. And that's not just within design. If we think about design, we're in a space where weather doesn't exist and people don't sleep, travel doesn't exist, no one is hot or cold, and essentially practicality isn't a problem, but also the way that we make fashion and the difference that it can have on the industry at a broader scale. However, obviously this sounds really exciting. But before we get too excited and like jump in with both feet and go, okay, I'm going to make loads of clothes that essentially don't need weather to exist and float above our heads and whatever, we have to think about the fact that ultimately, just like in like a gaming space, obviously authenticity is king in the metaverse, and then obviously community comes in at a very close second. So this isn't just a trend, and we shouldn't be jumping in just because. And just like in real life, when we're planning campaigns, booking media, or thinking about the next creative execution or something that we can push the boundaries or innovate in, we need to still be thinking, why should people care that we are there? What can we offer, and what are we bringing to the table?
So now that we've established that our audience are there, they're spending time on digital spaces, and we really believe that this isn't a phase. What are the opportunities to innovate for the long time, rather than just thinking about PR headlines for this year? And caveat, we had 15 minutes for this whole presentation, so we could spend about an hour speaking about this, but instead we pulled out 5 kind of key opportunities we think for brands at the moment. And hopefully that's kind of a useful starting point. The first is the opportunity to be more sustainable. So everybody who works in fashion will be aware of fashion's impact on the environment. People are purchasing on average 60% more garments than they were 20 years ago, and 85% of those textiles are going to landfill each year. And it's created this tension between everybody who acknowledges the impact that fashion is having on the environment, but with the consumer's desires for the new clothes and trend-led fashion, and ultimately businesses' desire for profit. And they have felt incompatible to date. But we think that digital fashion can actually overcome that, because it could shift your business from relying on creating, shipping, making physical goods to actually driving profit through digital goods, which don't rely on the same amount of kind of carbon footprint, essentially. So we actually think it's an interesting way of thinking, is to remember how we acted during the COVID pandemic. So our need for clothes, in theory, reduced, or it shifted. But that didn't mean that no one bought clothes anymore. It meant that they bought more tracksuits and they bought more nice shirts and jogging bottoms, because they cared about what they looked from the waist up, because we were on calls all day, and they weren't leaving for the same event. So they were shopping for more comfy clothes that they would wear indoors. And if we actually took that thinking and thought about what that might mean for the digital space, if you're spending 35% of your time and growing in the digital space, might that reduce your need for physical fashion and increase your need for digital fashion? And in which case, is there an opportunity for fashion brands to start building that as part of their P&L and their profit line? We think so. We think it's pretty exciting. And actually, the Gucci Aria campaign, there were digital handbags that were selling for double the price of physical ones, which is kind of mind-blowing.
So the second opportunity we want to talk about is the opportunity to collaborate with worlds and actually make spaces for your audience to collaborate and connect and engage with you authentically. So obviously this isn't essentially something that we are completely unfamiliar with in our reality now, but just thinking about how exciting that becomes with the metaverse is kind of mind-blowing. So obviously the existence of brands in the exact same way is accepted as part of the reality of the existence of the metaverse, just like it is in ours. And we don't necessarily need to be nervous about pixels over permits. Like essentially it means that you can actually make a space that you don't just paint with your brand, but actually is built with your brand in mind. So it's not just about dressing for the metaverse, it's also about dressing for what you want to do on the metaverse, again, like we do in real life. So you dress for the place, or you dress for the event, or you dress for the concert. But I mean, if we're dressing for the event, we should also be creating the event. Another thing that we always do in real life all the time and exists in the same way, minus the physical labor and catering, and lets you focus on the important stuff, which is expressing your brand in a world that essentially doesn't have gravity, or you know, like how exciting could that be in our creative reflection of ourselves and products. The third opportunity we want to talk about is the opportunity to really bridge the gap between in real life and metaverse personas. And essentially that should probably read real life people and their metaverse personas, thinking about it now. But like we all know, our avatars or our digital representations of ourselves, so that might even be like something that looks exactly like us, but that's taken to a new place, like with Microsoft Mesh, for example. They're just an extension of our in real life selves. They are not separate from us. They still rely on our thinking and our creativity and the way that we portray ourselves. And we spend more and more time in this space. So it's important that we start recognizing this as brands. So essentially, you know, if I was going to buy this shirt in real life, I would expect to be able to wear it right now to work, and then to the cinema after work, or to a restaurant. And ultimately, now maybe more of my time is going to be spent in a digital space. So maybe when I buy this shirt, I want to also be able to wear it where I show up digitally as well. So essentially, if you want to buy a top in real life, it could also unlock something within the metaverse. And it's really about brands like paying attention to the fact that they are purely connected, and it really is about just extending what you can do for one person rather than two separate entities.
I'm conscious that we run out of time, so I'm going to go quickly. We also think there's an opportunity to kind of democratize couture and personalization through NFTs, through non-fungible tokens, so through scarcity and uniqueness in fashion online. Fashion right now is very short-termist in the fact that you accept that you will wear something, a garment, for as much time as you want, but actually ultimately you will have to throw that away and it will be worthless to you. Whereas actually NFTs make fashion tradable. So how would we think about fashion if we knew that we would be able to sell on our coat that we wore in mint condition, even that if we'd had it for 2 years, kind of changes the way that we think about it and how we might curate our wardrobes for the long term, rather than thinking about something which is ultimately going to be needed to be thrown away.
And then lastly, just to quickly touch on the opportunity to shoot in extended reality. So essentially, this is just another way of bridging the gap between our real life representation and our digital brand spaces. So like as a brand ourselves, by shooting with extended reality. So that obviously unlocks tons of very exciting things, especially in terms of budget when we think about production, but then also about creating worlds that don't necessarily exist. But for example, if we create brand spaces within the metaverse, we can actually shoot them IRL with real life personas and IRL celebrities, to essentially make it more a part of our 360 campaign thinking, which it will become more and more so over the next couple of years.
So thank you. That was a lot to cover in 15 minutes, or maybe just over. But the series of talks today asked us, what's fashion's next normal? We think it's digital. We think it's in digital spaces and how people are going to express themselves in those digital spaces. People have always expressed themselves through fashion. So we don't think that that's any different, even though we're moving more digital. So yeah,
I mean, essentially, so just to wrap up, it's the opportunity to be tastemakers in a digital fashion space. I mean, the amount of questions you could ask yourselves of like, you know, how could you make a product if it essentially could last forever? That kind of thing. The opportunity to be more sustainable. So build out business cases for profitable digital fashion. The opportunity to collaborate with worlds. So really showing up where your audience are and essentially building something that isn't just painted but with your brand, but actually built with it in mind. The opportunity to democratize couture and personalization. So explore the opportunity for longevity. Again, a product that can last forever. What an interesting thing to think about. And then lastly, the opportunity to shoot with extended reality. So planning your next shoot within XR to really merge your digital brand space and your real brand space and make it part of your 360 thinking. So just to leave on a note of just essentially imagine if there were 3.2 billion people in real life who wanted something to wear, and we essentially just acted like it wasn't a huge and playful exploratory space and opportunity for us to play in.
That's a lot to think about, a huge amount to think about, guys. But thank you so much for such a great talk today, just on time. But I'm sure you guys could have gone for 2 hours if we could. So much of a lot to digest there, guys. If we want time for questions now, but obviously hit the guys up on LinkedIn, please, because I'm sure there's so much to talk about, not only how the metaverse can drive your own personal confidence, but also how it can actually help change the planet, which is actually quite remarkable.